Friends, today we will discuss very important basic concept of international humanitarian law. The topic is protection of sick and wounded soldiers during war and armed conflict. So let's start from introductions. Protecting the sick and wounded in armed conflict was the founding principles of the first Geneva Conventions signed in 1864. It remained the core of international humanitarian law as it extended to other aspects of conduct of war. Now consolidated in the Geneva Conventions of 1949, 3 additional protocols and a series of other treaties. The first Geneva Conventions was inspired by experience of Henry Dunant, a citizen of Geneva, on the battlefield of Solferino in 1859. His horror at the suffering of the sick and the wounded led him to publish a Memoirs of Solferino and mobilize a group of colleagues to press for international actions. The result was the first conventions signed by just 12 states. The organizing committee set up by Dunant and his colleague was to become the International Committee of the Red Cross. Today, the 4 Geneva Conventions of 1949 have achieved universal recognition and have been ratified by every state. The protection of the sick and wounded is now consolidated in the first and second Geneva Conventions of 1949 and the additional protocols 1 and 2 of 1977. The second conventions essentially extended the protection afforded to the sick and wounded on the battlefield to the naval warfare. This also includes protection to shipwreck. Next, friends, we will see protections and care of wounded, sick and shipwreck. 2 different series of rules are brought into applications in Geneva Conventions, depending on whether the wounded, sick or shipwrecked persons are members of the armed forces or civilians. Protocol 1 did away with these distinctions and created a single law for both categories, which greatly simplifies the practical application of the provision. Wounded and sick is defined as anyone in an armed conflict, whether military or civilian, who is in need of medical attention and is not taking part in hostilities. Shipwreck means military or civilian persons in a perilous situation at sea or any other water following a misfortune which has befallen them and who refrain from any act of hostility. Under the title Protections and Care, Article 10 of Protocol 1 states the basic rules in this regard. Rule number 1. All the wounded, sick and shipwrecked, to whichever party they belong, shall be respected and protected. Rule number 2. In all circumstances, they shall be treated humanely and shall receive to the fullest extent practicable and with the least possible delay the medical care and attentions required by their conditions. There shall be no distinctions among them founded on any ground other than medical ones. The provision says a lot in a few words. This covered the entitlement of wounded, sick and shipwrecked persons, whether civilian or member of armed forces, to care and medical help. Friends, it is prohibited any attempt upon their life or violence to their persons, and in particular to murder or exterminate the wounded and the sick, to subject them to torture or biological experiment, willfully to leave them without medical assistance and care, or to create conditions exposing them to contagion or infections. Parties to the conflict are required to take all possible measures, especially after an engagement, to search for and collect the wounded and the sick. Reprisals against the wounded and the sick, personnel, buildings or equipment protected by conventions are prohibited. Friends, next we'll discuss on protection of medical units, medical personnel, medical transport and religious personnel, that is support services. International humanitarian law establishes comprehensive and detailed protection for medical units, medical personnel, medical transport and religious personnel. Medical units are protected and they may not be used for other purposes or subjected to attack unless they are misused to commit act harmful to opposite party and outside their humanitarian function. They include fixed or mobile hospitals, field hospital or other installation used for medical care. For example, pharmaceutical stores. Civilian medical units, particularly hospital, must be designated as such by the authorities of the state concerned. At sea, hospital ships perform the functions of hospital on the land. They are protected under second conventions, provided that they are marked as such and that their characteristics have been notified to the party to the conflict. Medical personnel, including those employed in the search for and or the collection of wounded, are to be respected and protected whether they are civilian or military. They are not to be attacked on the battlefield and they must be allowed to perform their medical duties. If they fall into the hands of adverse party, they are not to be considered prisoner of war and may only be returned if they are needed to care prisoner of war. Any personnel not required for such duty shall be repatriated. ISL also elaborate the rules relating to medical transport. Civilian or military vehicles used to transport the wounded and the sick enjoy comprehensive protections. The same applies to transport of medical personnel and supplies. At sea, all types of ships may be used to transport the wounded and the sick and to rescue the shipwrecked, provided such ships are properly marked. Article 43 of Second Conventions provide that hospital ship must be painted white with the distinctive emblem, that is Red Cross or Red Crescents, painted in dark red as large as possible and so placed as to afford greatest possible visibility from the sea and from the air. The use of medical aircraft raised extremely difficult questions, given that at high speed aircraft can no longer be distinguished as medical with the naked eye, and that therefore a medical aircraft which is protected cannot be distinguished from one with a military mission. Geneva Conventions provided protection only for medical aircraft, following a flight plan previously agreed by both sides. Article 24 of Additional Protocol 1 now states that medical aircraft shall be respected and protected. Military and civilian religious personnel are entitled to the same protections. Their status is similar to that of medical personnel. Friends, now let us see role of civilian populations and of eth societies. Geneva Conventions provide rule for protection of civilians and eth societies, caring for sick and wounded, combatants and civilians. Protocol 1 further expanded this protection regime. Article 17 of Protocol 1 deals with the role of civilian populations and of eth societies from various angles. The article starts with the civilian population shall respect the wounded, sick and shipwrecked, even if they belong to the adverse party, and shall commit no act of violence against them. But the civilian populations in general and eth society, such as National Red Cross or Red Crescent societies or voluntary aid societies in particular, shall be permitted even on their own initiative to collect and care for wounded, sick and shipwrecked, even in invaded or occupied areas. The term of Article 17, paragraph number 1 is very clear. The said article states as, no one shall be harmed, prosecuted, convicted or punished for such humanitarian acts, while the initiative in paragraph 1 lies with the civilian populations. Paragraph 2 deals with the converse situation where the authorities, that is the party to the conflict, appeal to the civilian and eth society to collect and care for the wounded, sick and shipwrecked, and to search for the dead and report their locations. The parties are then obliged to grant both protections and necessary facilities to those respond to this appeal. The paragraph even lays down that if the adverse party gains control of the area, it shall afford the same protection and the facility for so long as they are needed. Anyone who, whether spontaneously or at the request of a party to the conflict, takes part in such humanitarian work may not be penalized or punished. That is, charitable work must always be respected. Friends, let us discuss on identification of protected persons or object, that is the protective sign or the emblem. Effective respect for and the protection of medical units, medical and religious personnel and medical transports depend to a very great extent on recognizing them as such. Article 18, paragraph number 1 of Additional Protocol 1 on identification prescribe that each party to the conflict shall endeavor to ensure that medical and religious personnel and the medical unit and transport are identifiable. Each party is to endeavor to adopt and to implement methods and procedures which make it possible to recognize medical unit and transport, which use the distinctive emblem and distinctive signal. Civilian, medical and religious personnel in occupied territory and in areas where fighting is taking place or is likely to take place should be recognizable by the distinctive emblem and identity card certifying their status. The Red Cross on the white ground since 1864 designate all persons, buildings, means of transport, etc. that are entitled to protections and respect under international law, irrespective of whether they are civilian or military in character. The effectiveness of the protection offered by the emblem depend on the trust that the party to the conflict have in the correct use of protective sign by the adverse party. For this reason, the use of the emblem must be strictly regulated not only through international law but also in domestic legislations. For instance, Geneva Convention Act 1960 in India. Such rules must then be strictly enforced. The responsibility for this lies with the party to the conventions and, in event of conflict, above all, with the belligerents. Misuse of emblem is forbidden. Deliberate use of the protective sign with the intention of abusing the trust of the adversary is perfidy and, in certain circumstances, must be considered as war crime. The conventions and additional protocols authorize the use of 4 emblems. They are Red Cross, the Red Crescent, the Red Crystal, that is 3rd protocol emblem, and Red Lion and the Sun, sign preferred by Persia, on a white background. However, today only the first 3 authorized emblems are utilized. Israel used the Red Seal of David, which is not recognized in international law, to mark persons and objects protected under Geneva Conventions. Friends, next let us see missing in actions and dead persons. Obviously, any armed conflict of some durations and covering a somewhat extended area entails uncertainty about the fate of vast number of individuals, combatants and civilians alike. Accordingly, the Geneva Conventions contain provisions designed to facilitate the tracing of missing and dead persons. The rule in Protocol 1 supplement these provisions. Article 32 of Additional Protocol 1 now establishes for period of armed conflict the right of families to know the fate of their relatives. Each party to the conflict has a special duty to search for persons reported missing. On the outbreak of war, they must at once set up information bureau to gather information concerning protected persons. Tracing requests from one side to other and the relevant reply are usually dealt with by Central Tracing Agency of the International Committee on the Red Cross, which also keep record of all sort of informations. Article 34 of Protocol 1 provides rules on the treatment of remains of persons who have died as a result of hostilities or occupations, and on the maintenance of and access to their grave site. At the outset of hostilities, each party must organize an official graves registration service. Friends, now we come to the concluding part of this topic. In conclusions, the central principle is that all wounded, sick and shipwrecked, to whichever party they belong, shall be respected and protected. This is the message from the Geneva Conventions and the Protocol. Appropriate medical attention has to be provided as quickly as possible and without any distinction between military or civilian, friend or foe. At all times, and particularly after an engagement, parties to a conflict must immediately take all possible measures to search for and collect the wounded, sick and shipwrecked, to protect them against pillage and ill treatment, and ensure their adequate care as well as to search for the dead and prevent their being despoils. Friends, from the above discussion, we may conclude that wounded, sick, and shipwrecked persons during war and armed conflict are well protected, and the special care are taken under Geneva law and their additional protocols. Apart from these rules, a body of customary rules supplemented these protections, particularly in non-international armed conflict. So, protection regime on wounded, sick, and shipwrecked is a comprehensive one under international humanitarian law.